The category is What the Trans Darlings.
Well, hello, and welcome to this fast-paced, action-packed, no-holds-barred, adrenaline-fueled thrill ride of an episode of What the Trans. God, I'm out of breath.
What the Trans.
Yes, indeed, it's us.
Happy New Year, even though we are way past the Larry David rule. Like, he's big on the whole, you can't say Happy New Year after like 3 days.
Yeah, I think so, but then I get that. But for me, it's kind of like, you'll say Happy New Year to people you've not spoken to since the year before, even if you only end up speaking to them in kind of February, and then by which point you say ironically, oh, by the way, Happy New Year, lol.
In that case, hello listeners, Happy New Year, lol.
Yeah, that's the one, bang on. So how are you?
I'm alright. I'm wearing my coat in the house because it's 2023, and everything's kind of a little bit broken outside.
It's cold outside. But fortunately, there is some kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, it's good. I like the atmosphere. It keeps me alive, and also all the people I like alive. And I like that.
Yes,
We should try and focus on the positives, because this episode gets weird.
It does get a bit weird, but, I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said this one moves fast, because so does the news in the UK if you're trans right now. So, shall we just get right into it?
Yeah, I think we should. Love to do a little bit of the old, how are you, ha, this is funny thing happened, but there's a lot. And there's a lot, so we should start with... the news.
Not the news. Okay, never mind.
That's literally the reason we're here.
Yes, it is. We made this bed, so we're going to have to lie in it. So what do we have first?
First, just a mini update on the Good Law Project and Gendered Intelligence's legal challenge of the NHS's shocking wait times for trans people. So every trans person listening will know that the waiting times for trans healthcare on the NHS, they are hilariously absurd. Waits between 2 and 5 years for a first appointment are the norm, and that isn't even including how long it can take to even get your GP to make the fucking referral in the first place. What some won't know is that the NHS pledges that patients will be seen within 18 weeks. The Good Law Project and Gendered Intelligence challenged the lawfulness of this situation, and their case was heard last November. And last week, the court decided to reject their claim and found the waiting times are not unlawful. However, there is some good news, because that's pretty shitty, but there's some good news. According to the Good Law Project, the High Court agreed that young trans people seeking healthcare are protected under the Equality Act just the same as adults. This could be very helpful going forward in ways that we'll probably see how they play out down the line. But the Good Law Project said they intend to appeal the decision, so this may not be over yet. Eva Echo, an activist and a named claimant in the case, made a statement on the Good Law Project website where she said, "I'm extremely disappointed by the decisions overall, which only serve to prolong the mental health suffering of the trans community, and I welcome the chance to appeal. I also welcome clarification that trans youths are protected under the Equality Act 2010, which will provide more people with protection against discrimination. So keep your ears on us to find out where this will go. We'll be on this as and when there's new stuff, which probably won't be for a number of months."
Indeed. That's the annoying thing about covering court cases, is that the court case happens and then you've got all this information and you've got to scramble to put it all together into some kind of relatively short narrative to explain on a podcast, rather than just literally reading through the judgment on a podcast, which is probably not as interesting for most people. And then you've got several months of, well, nothing's happening on that because we're waiting for the next stage of the court case. So that's the situation we're at. It's disappointing to hear that it's been thrown out. Of course, the Good Law Project, as ever, doing sterling work, and long may it continue. But unfortunately, on this occasion, the judge has decided that he'd rather take the route of sticking his fingers in his ears and going, la la la, I'm not listening, which that's the vibe I'm getting, but maybe he was distracted by something else. I don't know. And that's me assuming the judge is a he, but
they heard the case, which means that at some point they thought there was a chance that it could win. And if they take the appeal, which it sounds like they have, then it sounds like the High Court believe there's a good reason to hear the appeal.
Yes.
So, it's not exactly game over, as people who've listened to What the Trans for a long time will know. appeals sometimes work out, but we'll have to wait and see.
Indeed.
Who can predict the future?
So, moving very quickly onwards, and pretty sure you knew this was coming. Now, this second news story was going to be the meat for this episode before we were once again overtaken by events and had to flip things around a little. Yes, you've guessed it, it's the conversion therapy ban. Now, you might have heard some things about it already. The government did announce on January the 15th, so a few days ago as we record this, that there would be a fully inclusive ban on the abhorrent practice of trying to stop people from being gay, bi, or trans. And I think this would have been much bigger news if it hadn't happened at the same time as one or two other things, which we'll be talking about in a little while. Now, interestingly, this announcement came with the news that this particular bit of work would be handled not through the government's Equalities Office, but by Number 10 directly. And I say interestingly, but I could just as easily say hilariously, because this is the Office of the Prime Minister directly sidestepping the Inequalities Minister Kemi Badenoch, and my working hypothesis here is that Number 10 have done this as an attempt to distract from those other one or two things that I promise we will get to soon. But that doesn't seem to have worked out for them, though. The statement released on January the 15th is also lacking one or two specifics that many people have been hoping to see. Survivor of conversion therapy and former member of the government's LGBT advisory panel, Jane Ozanne, told Pink News that she was relieved to hear the government will include full protections for trans people, but remained concerned that the large loopholes may be created regarding whether someone can supposedly consent and on religious practices, pointing out that the latter practice there is the most common form of conversion therapy here in the UK. So while this is genuinely good news, we want details. The statement of January the 15th is very light on them, simply saying that the government will be taking action to implement a trans-inclusive ban on conversion therapy. So just quickly, what do you think, Michelle? Is this good news?
Well, looking at the track record of the history of the conversion therapy ban, I don't think I could blame anyone for not being particularly hopeful, especially with what we're going to be spending most of the episode talking about.
Yes.
It's pretty clear that Conservative government may believe they have an upside in doing things that are not exactly great for trans people, you know, playing up to the press and all that. So maybe putting in a loophole or two. Yeah, I can see them doing that. But also, it could go either way. Who knows at this point? Like, with what we're going to be talking about in the meat, like it's really hard to tell where the government can stand, because it's kind of, well, I guess we're just going to find out. I don't know what else there is to say, you know? It's going to be months before we get any kind of answer on this, because there's going to be another consultation, so we're not really going to know.
I wasn't aware initially that there was, in fact, going to be another consultation. And while that's disappointing as hell, it's also not surprising, because this lot, they love their consultations. They love to try and get the... is that phrase I've used I don't know how many bloody times on this podcast, which is the rights of the minority shouldn't be subject to the whims of the majority, right? And it's basically sending out to consultation where any man and his dog and their very, very turfy mates can weigh in on it. And yeah, so the fact that there's going to be a consultation is very frustrating.
Yeah, they kind of have to do a consultation on things like this. Like, that's part of the procedure.
Well, the procedure is bollocks.
Yeah, it feels like they've done so many of them at this point.
Yeah.
So how this is going to play out is that they will basically publish a draft of the bill at some point. This could be in a few months, maybe. They will spell out what they intend. And then the idea is that stakeholders, which is a fancy word for people who have a stake in this, can offer their thoughts. So they'll want experts and people who may have gone under the supposed conversion practices. And that is probably going to invite a lot of anti-trans people. That's what always happens now. If there is a thing that is remotely related to trans people, you can bet that hundreds and hundreds and potentially thousands of anti-trans wankers are going to try and kill it with really ill thought out and unresearched nonsense that they copy and pasted off Mumsnet.
I know, it's just... But that's what, in fairness, that's what government ministers seem to be doing, really. And some do it more often than others. I did find it hilarious that it was Number 10 directly sidestepping Kemi Badenoch, who I just call her the Inequalities Minister now, because that's literally what she is. I was reading into her, actually, and I read an article by her husband, who's got the most Scottish possible name, Hamish Badenoch. And that sounds pretty good, but it's a very Scottish name, and that, dear listener, leads us very neatly onto the meat. Because, well, Michelle, take it away.
Yeah, so this is a lot. If you've been watching any of the, news that isn't us, which is most of it, yeah, you may have got wind of this already. And we're recording this on Friday the 20th. By the time you get this on Monday the 23rd, there may have been developments. But here is everything that we thought was important to talk about at time of recording, and this isn't all of it. There are things that we missed because it's so big and there's so many angles to it, as you're about to see. So
the stuff we had to leave out, isn't there? There's a couple of elements there that we just literally didn't have time to kind of work into the narrative that we have.
So yeah, let's get to the meat of this pod. As we have referred to inadvertently earlier, the UK government, the Conservative UK government, has decided to block Scotland's gender recognition reform bill from becoming law. This comes after the bill has been bandied around Holyrood for 6, nearly 7 fucking years, after the bill has been subject to multiple public consultations and an incredible amount of parliamentary scrutiny, as well as absurd media-based fuckery that we have all been living under since before Donald Trump became a walking panic attack trigger.
Yeah.
This story began 7 years ago in the UK. The Conservative government under Theresa May announced her intention to reform the Gender Recognition Act in England and Wales. In Scotland, around the same time, the SNP government, the Scottish National Party government, did the same.
But between then and now, every single party in the Scottish Parliament pledged to reform gender recognition in Scotland in their election manifestos, including the SNP's, Scottish Labour, the Scottish Greens, and the Scottish Conservatives. A Scottish government was then formed by the SNP, who entered a power-sharing deal with the Scottish Greens, showing that gender recognition reform had a pretty powerful mandate from the Scottish people on top of the overwhelmingly positive responses to multiple public consultations. Now, this is the part where things stop making any kind of sense.
Yeah, so since 2016, you may have noticed there's been a moral panic in the whole of the United Kingdom, kicked up by the press, and about our presence, our existence, the concept of us, whether it's good or bad, that there's a concept of us.
Yeah.
And over time, the Conservative Party in Westminster turned away from their promises on this, with the arrival of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and Liz Truss as Women and Equalities Minister in 2020. It was this time that the Conservative Party leadership fully turned on trans people. Coincidentally, whilst they were cocking up the response to COVID-19, and this was not limited just to England and Wales. The Scottish Tories turned too.
What a coincidence. What an astonishing turn of events that those two things would turn up at roughly the same time. Good Lord. However, the SNP government in the Scottish Parliament knocked the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland bill together and pushed it through with support from the Scottish Greens, and it sailed through the Scottish Parliament with 86 MSPs voting for and only 38 MSPs voting against. The majority of the votes against came from, you'll never guess it, you'll never guess, you'll never fucking guess, from the Scottish Tories.
Yeah, so Scottish trans people finally got some Gender Recognition Act reform. Not loads. It did lower the time it takes to actually get a gender recognition certificate, and it did lower the age a person needs to be to get one to 16. But it did not include non-binary people. It still included forced weights and evidence proving you lived in role, whatever that means.
Yes.
But it was still a significant improvement. And in this climate, it was a fucking miracle that it happened at all. Much like me eating a vegetable.
I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to that later. But it did happen. Not Michelle eating a vegetable. I mean gender recognition reform in Scotland. It was to be a thing. Until it wasn't. The UK government's Scotland Secretary Alistair Jacks announced on Monday that he would be blocking the bill from becoming law. Yes, apparently that is a thing that the UK government can do, thanks to the legislative instrument that had never ever been used before, namely Section 35 of the Scotland Act.
Right, so the Scotland Act was basically the thing that allowed Scotland to have its own government that had actual powers over certain areas of law, and Section 35 was something of a fail-safe to block bills becoming laws that would conflict with established laws in legal areas the Scottish Parliament didn't have the right to mess with. Non-Scottish listeners could probably begin to understand why, after hearing that, a great many Scottish people want true independence.
Yeah, absolutely. Previously, I would have been like, oh no, Scotland, stay, please, I love you. Whereas now I'm like, bleeding and go, run, save yourselves. But just stop to take all of this in, right? the UK government appear to be so actively hostile to even the most mild of positive reforms for trans people, and also so actively hostile to Scottish democracy and autonomy, they decided to do something that no UK government has ever done before, which is invoke Section 35. This is the hill they've decided to die on. We will get to possible reasons why this is in the case later on.
So Rishi Sunak's Conservative government is arguing that Scottish gender recognition reform would cause significant disruption in the form of having two different gender recognition systems in the UK, despite the fact that lots of things are different in law between Scotland and England, because that's what devolution is. I mean, that's literally what it is. That's peculiar to me, but okay. They also claim that the bill potentially increased the risk of danger to cisgender women and girls, but they were not that forthcoming on specifically how, because I guess saying the quiet part would make them look bad, or, maybe they do truly believe that the thin line that is protecting cisgender women from being sexually assaulted is a birth certificate. Maybe they believe that this fantasy happened. Oh, damn it. If only I had a birth certificate, then I could do something awful.
Yes, indeed. Slipped up there, didn't we?
And they also claimed that the bill would cause adverse conflict with the Equality Act.
Right.
Despite the fact that the bill has nothing to do with the Equality Act. Clearly, Sunak's Conservatives are willing to risk further antagonising Scottish people and causing a constitutional crisis for the union they claim to love so much over these peculiar reasons that don't really add up. But okay, you do you, Sunak. You do you, Conservatives. This is fine. It's all fine. This is a fine thing. It's going to be fine.
In a sense, it's quite impressive because, within a few days of Liz Truss being in office, the Queen was dead, and within a few weeks of Rishi Sunak being in office, the UK is going to be dead. So,
yeah.
Are
the Conservatives really, anarchists?
Well, they say that they're a safe pair of hands. Maybe they've been playing the long game. There's something-ists, usually.
I'm a big fan of the anarchists. They always seem to show up to things.
It's called solidarity, babes. That's how it works.
Yeah, they do the solidarity thing. And if I was a rather crafty anarchist who maybe had watched a bit too much Scooby-Doo, I would cosplay as a Conservative, get into government, and then try to end the state.
Yeah. It's a good...
And doing it with trans law stuff? That's a very queer anarchist move, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's surprisingly based, I suppose, yes.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly not that.
Yes.
Because, they would dress better. The cabinet, as a rule, would dress better if that was true.
They would. It would be the mohawk that would give it away. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, you don't really imagine Suella Braverman with a fade. That's not really something you can picture, is it?
Oh, I've heard her referred to as Cruella Braverman, which also is. That's
good.
Yeah, that's very, very on the nose and good. Anyway, let's crack on, shall we?
Yeah, we got to read things, right? So, but the response from the SNPs in Westminster during a recent Commons debate over the whole shit show was very, very much in disagreement of all of the points we just brought up. At a recent protest in London, I bumped into Scottish National Party MPs Mary Black, Amy Callaghan and Kirstin Oswald and chatted to them about what they think is really going on.
My name's Mary Black and I'm she/her.
Amy Callaghan, MP, she/her.
I'm Kirstin Oswald, I'm the MP for East Renfrewshire and she/her.
Hello, gang of SNP MPs I just run into. How's it going? Why did you come to the protest today?
Well, do you go first, Amy?
We've come here to show our support for the trans community because Rishi Sunak's government are marginalising one of the most marginalised communities we have in society. They're riding roughshod over Scottish democracy, but they're using trans people to do so. So we think it's really important to be here and show our support.
Right, so you were all there for the debate yesterday. What's your take on it? What did you think of everything that went down?
Horrific. I thought yesterday's debate was, I don't know about these two, but I found it very difficult to sit through at times because the misinformation, the misogyny, the outright lies that we're getting told consistently throughout the day. When I'm looking at the people who are making those cases, trying to figure out whether they are sincere in what they're saying or whether they know it's a culture war and they're happy to spit out the lines, I'm still not sure of. Either way, I know it's unacceptable.
And being mansplained to on this issue by male, pale and stale Tory MPs is completely uncomfortable and unjustifiable.
And if you imagine, we were all uncomfortable yesterday. It was uncomfortable and challenging to listen to some of the things that were being said across the chamber. And if we were uncomfortable, how uncomfortable must people have been who were watching that, who were expecting that their democratically elected representatives would stand up for their rights? Because that's our job, all of us, no matter what party we're in. Our job is to stand up for our constituents. And that means all of our constituents, not just the people that we find it might be politically expedient to stand up for. So I thought it was a really, really depressing day for democracy and a really depressing day for equality as well.
Why do you think the Conservative government are pulling this?
I would say it's because they're a government that are entirely out of ideas when it comes to real issues, like the economy and policies. But I also think that their tactic is now just to stoke a culture war. And the reason that they have picked this issue, I imagine, is because they're playing on the fact that the vast majority of people aren't, in depth, in tune with trans issues. Because, of course, this is a minority in society, which makes it even more reprehensible that they're prepared to use a vulnerable minority in order to try and gain some points in the polls. It's disgraceful.
And I think the fundamental point is so many of us get into politics to further progress equality, and all this government is doing is trying to suppress it further.
I think that's right. The Tory government here at Westminster is an extremely right-wing government. They're pursuing policies every day that are aimed at trying to remove people's rights, to make people less able to pursue a life that they want to. And this is just another example of that. But it's a pretty poor show to be using this issue to deny Scottish democracy, knowing the challenges which trans people already face every day in their lives. And they do know.
When it comes to the people of Scotland, how do you think they're going to respond to, how do you think they have been responding to all of this from the constitutional side?
From the constitutional side, I think even just looking at the Scottish Parliament, it's clear that across the political spectrum, people recognise that this is undemocratic, what the UK government are doing. They are actively just outright removing a law that the Scottish Parliament has unanimously passed. So again, I don't think they're going to win themselves any votes north of the border with this map.
And it's one of at least 3 acts by the UK government this week that's riding roughshod over the people of Scotland and marginalised communities. You've got the anti-workers bill, you've got the retained EU law bill, which is going through just now, and this UK government just is so out of touch and unkind and uncaring and totally not related to the people of Scotland at all.
I think that's right. It's another example of the UK government thinking that they are in some way given the right to overrule the wishes of the Scottish people, to override the votes of the Scottish Parliament, and that's plainly anti-democratic. I think that they'll find it's also unsustainable for them. It's not for the UK government to overrule what people in Scotland's representatives have voted for. It's not for them to decide our future either. And I think that people in Scotland looking at this are appalled. The people who I'm speaking to, who may not always have been friends of the independence movement, are absolutely astonished and shocked that the UK government would behave this way. I don't think it is going to go well for them.
So, jumping onto that, Nicola Sturgeon has indicated that she's going to challenge this in the courts. Are you confident that the courts will come down on your side?
Honestly, I don't know. I think the fact that we're having to take this to court is a testament to how poor this UK government has relations with the Scottish Parliament, because we shouldn't have to go to court to establish what is and has been devolved since the Scottish Parliament was reconvened. Do you have anything to add to that?
Actually, I do. I think that the point about us, we shouldn't be in the position where the First Minister is having to say that or to go down that road. That is a democratic outrage. It's a ridiculous situation to be in. But I think if you look a little bit further at some of the legal issues surrounding this, I had a look at the statement of reasons that the Secretary of State for Scotland eventually published very late yesterday. And I think it is one of the most flimsy documents that I have ever seen. I cannot begin to comprehend why what is in that document would suggest to anyone that there was a need in any way for them to overrule what Scotland's doing. I think it's a shambles, and I think it's a disgrace.
Just a final note that the UK government trampling on the one light that at the end of the tunnel that trans people have had, that the Scottish Parliament have given them, is an utter outrage, and we shouldn't be letting it go on, and we're not going to let it happen. We're going to fight this at every turn.
This is, I think, a key point, because in Scotland this has been getting debated since 2016, so it's been years. It is the most consulted piece of legislation that's gone through the Scottish Parliament, so this idea that it is rushed is outright lie, and the idea as well that the UK government would wait a number of years, what's that, 7 years basically, to raise any concerns at all, I think shows exactly that they're not genuine.
The consultation process.
Yep.
So they had ample opportunity, but they were too busy with their various leadership contests to actually bother giving a proper contribution to that consultation process, and instead have waited into this last opportunity that they had just before the bill received royal assent to give us any kind of contribution to it, and it's a ludicrous one to do.
Yeah, they didn't mince their words, did they?
No, they did not, and nor should they, frankly, because yes, we're concerned about this as trans people who do not live in Scotland, but there's a whole country who have just been overridden by Westminster, who they're supposed to have devolved powers from. It's just, as they've said, it's trampling all over Scottish democracy, and in a sense, them trampling over trans people's rights is not surprising, but them doing that? Wow. So, yeah, that's some excellent stuff. Did you say that you just bumped into them crossing a street, right? It was just a matter of luck.
Well, yeah, me and Alex, another person in the team who are the trans, the protest started off, actually outside Downing Street, because across the road there was, a nurses' protest.
I see.
It was like a queuing system. The trans protesters had to wait for the nurses to finish, and then it was our turn.
Okay.
So then we crossed the road to go to the place we were supposed to protest, and suddenly I realised I'm surrounded by Scottish MPs. Scottish National Party MPs.
Nice.
This is peculiar. And so I just went up to Mary Black and was like, "Hey, I'm Michelle from What the Trans," did the thing that I do a lot, and she was very nice. And her, Amy and Kristen came over and we had a brief chat. And yeah, and that's what you just heard. And it's really strange that this drama over Scottish independence and the relationship between Scotland and the Union has been fraying.
Yes.
And that fraying has been exacerbated by the Conservative Party, who seem to be very antagonistic because I think they want all the power. They want to collect it all up for them. They want all of it. And they hate the idea that the Labour government, before they got in, were just like, "Here you go, Scotland, do your own thing. We're not going to give you all the keys. We're going to keep the parental controls on, with this Section 35, but, have at it. You can do what you like with gender recognition."
Among other things.
Amongst other things. And the Conservative Party are now using that. And that seems like a good, solid reason for them to be doing this, because it kind of combines the culture war shit of us, like they said, and use that to bash Scottish independence with it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, obviously, there was that I'm not amazed, actually, but about the fact that you had to, queue for your chance to protest. Who was up after you? The teachers or something? Anyway, lots of people with lots of reasons to protest, and maybe we should all be doing quite a lot more of that. Anyway, so... that was London. The response in Holyrood to all of this has been equally forthright. Now, MSPs from the SNP and the Scottish Greens have, very broadly, been united in their disgust at what the UK government is trying to pull. And we had our reporter Alex Maguire go along to a protest last week against that bloc in Edinburgh, where he chatted to Scottish Greens MSP Maggie Chapman, who has been championing the bill and trans people in general throughout this entire process.
It must be frustrating as heck with everything going on in Section 35 haven't been issued.
I mean, when I heard the news on Monday, I was really, really angry. I think it's a despicable use of what is an important part of the Scotland Act. I think it's a despicable decision of the UK government to use it on an equalities issue in this way. We know that gender recognition reform has cross-party support in the Scottish Parliament. We know that actually it was in all parties' manifestos in 2016 and in 4 of the 5 parties' manifestos in 2021. So for the UK government to turn around and say that this law is not legitimate is an outrage. We've also heard that the UK government has said that none of the amendments we've discussed in the various stages in committee, none of them have actually satisfied their concerns. They basically don't want reform. In Scotland, we do. In Scotland, we have said in our parliament that we want reform, and we need to fight the Section 35 order.
Yeah. It's interesting they've decided to use Section 35 and the excuses that they have, considering Rishi Sunak turned around a few months ago and said, oh, well, we're thinking about taking trans people out of the Equality Act.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's clear that the UK government, I would say that their behaviour certainly represents transphobia to me, and some of the comments that we've heard have been outrageous. I think one of the things that is really, really important for us to do is see this issue as part of a much wider series of issues. As you mentioned, trans healthcare. In Scotland, it's also in radical need of additional resources of reform to ensure that it's fit for purpose. We know that we face the ending conversion practices legislation later on this year, and
supposedly
they are also making noises about challenging that, even though the committee report that talked about it was unanimous, including the Conservatives. So I think this is a really, really important issue. I think it's part of a bigger culture war.
So again, she didn't mince her words.
No.
She was like, it's very hard to fake that kind of emotional response. Not that any of the people we've talked to were overly emotional,
No.
but you could tell like they were really not happy about it. And that's very, very hard to put on as a thing. So I'm inclined to believe that it's genuine. And especially in Maggie Chapman's case, because she's kind of been doing that all the way through. I was watching her fight, like, I was thinking when I was watching the amendments for this on Scottish Parliament TV online, when they were doing the amendment stage of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill.
Yep, I remember.
And she was there basically saying all of the things that just made me think, oh, she's done the work. She's talked to a lot of trans people. Like, the things she was saying, you can't really do that without talking to a lot of trans people.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're cis. Like, she knew her shit. But then she was roundly, like, rejected a lot of times because of it. Like, you know, there were Labour representatives there who were kind of trying to, well, be supportive, but kind of also give a little. Whereas Maggie Chapman was like, no, we're not giving anything. It's already a joke that, like, non-binary people aren't in this, or that's not something she explicitly said, but you know what I'm saying.
One thing that we haven't talked about yet with all of this is the response from the UK Labour Party, who are ostensibly the opposition to all of this shit stew. Now, you might be astonished to hear, although I doubt it, that it hasn't really been in line with what many in the trans community have wanted, or even what we expected. For the past several months, leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has adopted a stance of being open, accepting, and even validating anti-trans activists, seemingly in an attempt to please everyone. In November last year, Keir Starmer gave an interview to Mumsnet, you know, that place where folks can get parenting advice and radicalised into the far right, all under one horrible, horrible roof. And it was there that he outlined how he did not believe that young people under 18 should be allowed to transition only with their parents' consent, and that blatant transphobia from a Mumsnet poster sounded perfectly reasonable. And ever since, he has done similar, culminating in several media appearances just over the last month where he's doubled down on those views. He did call for Gender Recognition Act reform, but also failed to oppose the blocking of Scotland's Gender Recognition Reform Bill and voiced concerns over the impact of said bill.
Yeah, so Labour for Trans Rights are a campaign group made up of trans Labour members who are attempting to push the party to be better on our issues. I spoke to them at another protest to get their take on the situation.
I'm Alexis, she, her. I'm Alex, they, them.
Labour for Trans Rights people, Alexis and Alex, thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here on this momentous occasion.
It's been quite a few days.
Safe to say that it has not been a happy, rosy time of sunshine in the Labour Party as a trans person.
It's not been the easiest few days to be Labour for trans rights.
Yeah, indeed. It has rather been the opposite. It has been a lot of angry, screaming, wanting to bite my nails off, swearing at the TV, you know, the usual sort of things that happens when the transphobe opens their mouth and the transphobe in question is leader of the Labour Party.
So I was going to ask, what's your take on Keir Starmer's position he's been putting out?
Spineless cowards. Let's just go with that. There can be no other way to describe it. Starmer spent 2021 fawning over us, telling us that they would absolutely stand by us, that they would have our backs, that GRA was coming, that transphobia definitions for the party were coming, and they've betrayed that trust quite thoroughly. They've embraced everything that we hate about the Labour Party right now. They've embraced the turf talking points. They've just stopped even bothering for even the most marginal of token gestures towards us. It's clear that Keir Starmer's Labour is not safe for trans people, and we are hanging by a thread in our commitment to keep it going, because frankly we expect better from Labour, we expect better from the Party of Equality, and it's just not anymore.
And it goes without saying as well that, you know, Welsh Labour and Scottish Labour have been fairly good in their response to all this. And Keir Starmer isn't just screwing over trans people, he's screwing over whole swathes of his party, and people are going to get really angry about that. Just giving in to a handful of bigoted, prejudiced MPs, that is not going to end well.
It's amazing that we had so many wonderful speeches from Scottish MSPs and even from Labour MPs here today, and yet the party still doesn't recognise that it's digging itself into a pit it can't escape from. Starmer should know that this juncture of embracing turf talking points isn't going to have a happy ending for him. There's no reason why he would want to embrace this other than to gain the marginal few votes of turfs and bigots and appease those in the party who hold so much influence over him, instead of standing up and standing with us, standing with the LGBT members who are now shocked and betrayed, and the devolved groups of Labour who have also been stabbed in the back. It's inconceivable, but here we are. Here we are at the start of the year, not even the first month of the year, and already Labour feels like it's stepped back 20 years. It's ridiculous.
Have you tried to reach out to Keir Starmer?
Oh, funny you mentioned that. We launched an open letter to Keir Starmer after his Mumsnet interview back in October. Was it October? Yes. Time is a fickle thing. We reached out and we received the support of quite literally hundreds of people from across the UK and even across the world. We received support from Unison LGBT, the LGBT branch of Britain's largest trade union.
Young Labour and Labour students.
Labour students and Young Labour. It is impossible to get them to agree on anything, but we managed it. We managed to get all this support, but did we hear a word? Did we squat? Never a response, never a suggestion, never a single word.
We asked Keir Starmer to come around the table with us and discuss trans rights. Keir Starmer never even responded to us.
Not a word, never responded. So what are we left with now? We're left with a Labour Party where Keir Starmer happily embraces turf talking points about 16-year-olds not being able to change their gender, about we need to take it slow and steady, about this being rushed legislation, about wait and see. But the fact is, we've already waited and seen. We've spent 6 fucking years of trying to get this through.
Keir Starmer has allowed himself to be outflanked by a Tory minister, and that's quite an embarrassing position for a Progressive Party to be in.
In the circumstance that Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer's Labour Party wins the next general election, do you think there is a possibility that there is something to hope for there, for some kind of turnaround once he's claimed his throne? Or do you think that this is a sign that this is going to be the way of things for now?
It completely depends on how good we are at our jobs.
Yes, it rather does.
It completely depends on Labour MPs, especially Labour MPs who have professed their support for the trans community over the years, coming out and challenging Keir Starmer, and in the event the Labour wins the general election, challenging a Keir Starmer government to honour its commitment to bringing in self-ID laws across the UK. I'm certainly not optimistic.
I think when it comes to the next general election, there's a lot of uncertainty up in the air. Keir Starmer, as it stands right now, wouldn't do nothing for us, and that's the bitter truth, and that's the truth that people will have to accept when talking to trans people about why they don't support the party. But it's our job now to keep up the fight. It's incredibly depressing to be trans in Labour right now, but we're not giving up. We're not going to stop fighting. We're not going to stop working with the excellent MPs like Olivia Blake and Nadia Whitome, who are here today. We're not going to stop pushing for solidarity and support from our trade union allies. We're not going to stop going to members across the country and getting them in their CLPs to stand up in support with us, because if enough of us do that, we can show the party where the real power lies. and Keir Starmer will ever regret having opened his mouth to talk about turf talking points.
Keir Starmer's got to realise at some point that, I mean, if we look at this crowd here, it's predominantly young people. This is the Labour electorate of the future. Does he want to alienate and ostracise millions of voters across the UK on trans rights? It's not a calculation I'd be making.
Keir Starmer has to recognise that trans rights will win in the end. We'll win because we'll be doing it for love rather than hate, and because we have a clear moral goal. If there's nothing else, he knows that by doing this now, he only gets short-term gain. So we're going to keep fighting, we're going to keep pushing, and we're going to crawl through the mud. We're going to take on every single challenge that comes our way. We're going to make sure that we're there, nipping at their heels, reminding them that they made a promise to us years ago that they'd always stand with us, and we're going to remind them of the fact they haven't kept that promise.
Yeah, so it's safe to say they aren't entirely happy with the state of UK Labour Party.
Yeah, you could say that. Fucking wow. Nice. It's great stuff, honestly.
You say great stuff. It's great stuff that we get to make a good pod out of it.
Yes.
It sucks to be trans in the Labour Party right now. Like,
Yeah, that's fair.
it clearly is coming at a cost. I mean, I was saying to them when we were arranging, like when and where we were going to talk, I was just like, a few years ago, I would have been able to talk to a bunch of people. But at this point, all of the contacts I had in and around LGBT Labour, the Labour Party, who were trans, they're not there anymore.
Yeah.
They've left.
Good heavens.
Right now,
Shocking.
Labour for Trans Rights are the only people with like active memberships in the trans community that I know of. There will be people out there who do, who are listening to this now. They might change their mind at some point, maybe after listening to this. But they will be out there. But they're the only ones that I know of.
Yeah.
At this point, and there's a reason. A lot of people were taking umbrage with the lack of action over Rosie Duffield, but now, and also with the vague comments of support that weren't really, doing anything. They weren't really challenging anything, and now they seem to have taken on board some anti-trans talking points and made those policy. So that's going to be fun.
Yes, indeed.
Also upset were a bunch of Scottish Labour Party MSPs up in Holyrood.
Yes, indeed.
So according to a report in the Daily Record, MSP Monica Lennon was not pleased with Starmer's take on any of this. In her own words, she said, "I was very disappointed with Keir Starmer's comments at the weekend on the GRR legislation, which was passed overwhelmingly by the Scottish Parliament and which improves the lives of trans people. Keir needs to be better briefed before he talks about issues debated extensively by the Scottish Parliament."
So those views clearly clash with Keir Starmer's and the UK Labour Party, which released a statement to Pink News last week, doubling down on Keir Starmer's lines while placing the blame for this situation entirely on the SNP and the Conservatives, and called for them to find a compromise.
And some Labour MSPs also called for a compromise. I'd say maybe even slightly the majority. This included Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawar, who, according to The Guardian, said, "How Keir decides what the law looks like in other parts of the UK is absolutely a matter for the UK party, but where there is agreement is around protection of devolution, around reform, around protecting of single-sex spaces, and removing the inhumanities of the process of obtaining a GRC." See, they think that if they do both, that's going to work. But what protecting single-sex spaces has meaned for the last, 7 years is protect them from us.
Yes.
That's what it means. That's what it's always meant. Protect single-sex spaces from the presence of a trans person.
Yes. How dare we exist? Fear us. Fear us.
Yeah, so it can't be a surprise to them if trans people are like, "Oh,
well, fuck you
Well,
guys.
fuck Labour then."
Yeah, basically.
And it doesn't matter if you follow up with and remove the inhumanities of the process of obtaining a GRC. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's good and all, but also you're kind of implying that we're dangerous to be around, which, I mean, you don't want to ignore you don't want to ignore, any good that's there, but you kind of have to when it's the pre-thing is, well, they got a point.
Yeah.
Letting trans people do things could be terrible.
And, well, just to throw this in, we did in fact reach out for comment from the UK Labour Party, but they didn't get back to us. Cannot think.
Well, actually, I'm going to double check that just now.
Okay.
Because maybe they never have before.
Yes.
Nope, still nothing.
Shocking stuff.
But we did get a response from Pam Duncan-Glancy, Scottish Labour MSP and member of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee in the Scottish Parliament, to get her take on the UK government's intervention and the Labour Party's response. Pam Duncan-Glancy, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, you're welcome.
What's your take on the whole situation with the Section 35 block of the GRR bill?
I'm absolutely gutted, to be honest. I'm heartbroken that it's come to this. I supported that legislation. I did everything I possibly could, as did the Scottish Labour Party and others across Parliament in Scotland, to make it a bill that the public could have confidence in and that would deliver the change that trans people really needed. So I'm gutted. I really can't describe it any other way.
What's your take on comments from Keir Starmer and Anna Sawar about reaching a compromise and Keir Starmer's concerns around the bill?
I think that Anna Sawar is right to say that Section 35 is the wrong approach. I completely agree. It is not the correct approach for this. What we really need now is for people to look at the legislation as it stands and look at where we need guidance for public authorities and other services and organisations so that they understand how to deliver it, how to support all of the people that they provide services to. And we said that all through the process, that guidance would be crucial. And that's something that we need to make sure happens. And unfortunately, the Tories never do anything like this in good faith because you can't trust them on equalities or human rights. So we've got a really difficult situation whereby we have two governments who are going to have to get together and talk about how they're going to prepare guidance for this legislation, not change it or do anything that would undermine the principles of that legislation, but draft guidance that would make sure the organisations on the front line knew what they were doing. Now, you and I both know that the changes that the GRR bring forward are a very limited set of are a very limited set of changes that are incredibly important for trans people and that apply in a limited set of circumstances. And those circumstances, for some organisations, they'll need to know what that means, even if it means, do you know what, nothing will change about how you deliver your service. We still need people on the front line to understand what it means for them, because let's be honest, this last couple of years has had a horrible discussion and debate around this, where people have imagined all sorts of things that would happen as a result of it that we all know are not the case. However, if we need a piece of guidance that says this is what this legislation means, this is what it does and doesn't do, this is what it means for your service, which, as I said, could include it won't mean much difference in what you have been doing. Nonetheless, there needs to be guidance, and that's why we need both governments to sit down and do it, because if we don't do that, we're in a situation where the legislation that trans people so desperately need, and I desperately want to see enacted, won't happen. So we need these governments to sit down and do it. And I want to be really clear that I know that it's really difficult for any of us to trust the Tories to do this in good faith on the basis of the fact that they've never done anything on equalities and human rights in good faith. That's really hard. But the reality is that's what we're going to have to really hope and push them to try to do and see sense in all of this and stop the ridiculous culture war that they've obviously used as a distraction from the fact that they can't do anything and they have no policies. They've lost the confidence of the public.
Interesting you bring up the culture war angle. There's been a lot of stuff going around about this bill enabling predators. Specifically, at time of recording, Kemi Badenoch just came up with that this morning. There's part of me that thinks trying to get around the table with people that think things like that, it sounds daunting. Do you see any chances of that happening?
It's horrible. I think daunting is one word for it. I think trying to understand or believe that Kemi Badenoch will do this in good faith is really, really hard. I get that, especially when she's coming out with statements like that this morning. It's a disgrace that we've got to a place now that this bill has, the way that this bill has been handled, particularly by the Tories. I mean, I don't know if you watched, I'm assuming you did watch how they handled the bill throughout the process, but particularly at stage 3, it was so cynical. Like literally they did everything they could to frustrate the process, which was very unbecoming of them all, to be honest. And I was disappointed in a number of them for doing it the way they did it. But, can we be surprised? I don't think so. Do we trust people like Kemi Badenoch and others to get around the table and do this? Probably not. But the good thing is here, actually, there's a statutory responsibility for an organisation like the Equality and Human Rights Commission to work with the Scottish Government, the UK Government and the Scottish Human Rights Commission to try and get this right. So there are other people who I believe may be able to help this process get through and strip back all of the politics, all of the culture war that the UK Government, the Tories would like us to have on it and say, what does this mean in practice? And I know and I understand that will be really worrying for people. And it is, because it's really hard to sit and get round the table with somebody that's also conflating part of this issue, part of this debate to be about sexual predators. Is sickening, absolutely sickening. But I sincerely hope that the organisations that are statutorily obliged to support changes in legislation and then provide guidance for how they work in practice will be able to help navigate that. So that trans people can get this legislation enacted as quickly as possible, because that's what we need to do. They would have made preparations, plans on the basis of this bill going through, and now look what's happened. Like we can't allow this to continue like that. So we really have to hope that we get to a position where organisations know what they're doing. This is not a matter of whether the bill should go ahead. The bill's been passed. This is a matter of how, and we are relying deeply on organisations to do the right thing here, be grown-ups and get the job done.
So Nicola Sturgeon has signalled that she's willing to go to the courts over this. How do you think, if it does get that far, how do you think it's going to go?
It's really, really hard to tell. If it goes to court, the thing that worries me most about it going to court is the length of time it's going to take before this bill ever gets near the statute books and gets royal assent, because we know that there will be a significant delay as a result of that. I would like to think that the bill has a decent chance. I have spent hours and hours and hours, days, weeks, months actually, as we all have, scrutinising, understanding and listening to as many people as I possibly can on this piece of legislation. And I believe in the strength of the legislation. And I say that on the basis of all the evidence that I've taken, all the people I've spoken to, and all the views I've heard. And I hope that it would have a good chance. I just hope we don't get to that point.
Pam, thank you very much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, constitutional crises, threats to democracy and Scottish autonomy, but what about us? How has this affected Scottish trans people? So to find out, again, we've talked to Amber Roberts, a trans woman who is living and working in Scotland.
Amber Roberts, thank you so much for joining us on the pod today. Just so we're very clear, you are an LGBTQIA plus officer in the Scottish National Party, but you are speaking in a personal capacity today. You are not representing the SNPs. Just want to put that out there so people don't get mixed up. I'd start by asking you, how have the last 24 hours been for you and your trans friends? How do you feel about everything that's been going on?
Well, last 24 hours has been hard. I'm not going to lie. 22nd of December was absolutely amazing when the bill passed here in Scotland. But we knew that Alistair Jack was going to, he started sabre rattling basically on the same day, literally within the hour of the bill passing. And that's all I thought it was, okay, so it's Tory sabre rattling, but eventually they'll just go, you know what, no, we can't block this. But the fact that they are blocking it is heartbreaking. It's just a betrayal, not just of trans rights, but on Scottish democracy, and many people will say that, they'll keep on talking about how it's an attack on Scottish democracy, and they'll touch on that it's an attack on trans rights, but they won't expand on that. And yes, it is an attack on democracy, but we also really need to drive home that this is a direct attack on trans people, and it's using trans lives as a weapon to stop Scottish democracy. And that really needs to be expressed a lot more. In terms of how I've been feeling last 24 hours, last night I was full of rage, upset. It was very difficult. Earlier in an interview today, I burst into tears because of this, and it is really, really difficult. And the trans people I know, not just in Scotland, but up and down the UK, where I've got friends basically in every corner, they're all saying the same thing, that this is not right of the UK government. They should not be blocking this bill. And the reason for that they shouldn't be blocking this bill is very simple. Inside the Scottish Parliament, obviously there are things that are devolved, there are things that are not. Well, I'm sorry to say, but the gender recognition is devolved to the Scottish Parliament, contrary to popular belief by many people out there, and they're all misinformed. The fact of the matter is, gender recognition is devolved to the Scottish Parliament, and we have every right to be legislating on it, and Westminster really have no right to be blocking it.
It sounds like you're of the opinion that this may not be entirely about transphobia or trans people or anything like that, that this is very much attacking Scotland's autonomy.
It's both. Basically, from how I see it is the Tories have went, oh, cool, right, we don't like trans people anyway, so we can attack them and we can also attack Scotland at the exact same time with the same thing. And that's exactly what they're doing. You know, it's no secret that people in Scotland want independence. It is no secret that people in Westminster don't want Scotland to have independence. And Westminster have tried and tried and tried to really block us from getting that. And so they're kind of trying to assert their authority over us, even though that, as I said, gender recognition is devolved to the Scottish Parliament. So this is just a blatant attack on both trans rights, trans people, and it's also a blatant attack on Scottish democracy and Scotland's right to write their own laws. It's a very new low for the Tories. I've said in interviews today, and I'll say it again, that it wasn't that long ago that Theresa May, then Prime Minister, when she said this, was fully supportive of gender recognition reform and would have been supportive of this bill in Scotland. But in just a few short years, the Tories have completely U-turned on that and went, no, it's Scotland that's doing it, so we're not going to support it. That's the basis of this.
So it sounds like yourself and maybe some of your friends feel attacked on two different fronts because of your trans, non-binary identities and your national identity.
Exactly, yes, it is.
So since this whole shit show started, protests have been organised and are taking place all over the United Kingdom. By the time you, dear listeners, are hearing this, there will have been protests in Dublin, Leeds, Edinburgh, Dundee, Glasgow, York, Bristol, and 3 different protests in London. There may well have been more at this point, but we're in the past. I mean, that's how time works. We're in the past, and you're in the future, listener, so there may have been more developments. You would know how time works. I'm going to stop condescending to the audience. So, yeah, in London on the 18th of January, I attended a protest where somewhere between 500 and 700 people protested outside Downing Street. This was loud, this was angry, and rightly so. The day before that, I attended another protest in the same place. This one had somewhere between 12 and 15 people, which sounds bad, but that was mostly due to the fact that the protest had only been announced the day before, in the middle of a work day. So, you know, that was a pretty good turnout considering. Also worth noting, there was just as many press.
For the first one.
Yeah, I've never seen that many press at a protest for trans stuff before. And I've never seen that many MPs at a protest before for trans stuff.
Valid.
Going back to the protest that Mary Black and the other SNP MPs were at. The constitutional crisis angle has definitely put a focus on the trans angle a lot more than maybe you would think. Because I've been to so many protests, and you have too, where there's been well, we're the only press there most of the time.
Yeah, usually.
And we're barely press. We're in bedrooms.
Yeah, it's true. I was going to make a joke and say, no, I'm in the kitchen today, but I'm not. I'm in the room. I'm in my bedroom, which is doubling as a studio, as it always does. But yes, you're quite right. I did find it interesting that the one on the 17th was very sparsely attended, except by the press. You might have easily ended up with a scenario where the press outnumbered the protesters.
Yeah, I mean, it may have done at certain points. I don't know. I've never seen that much press at a trans-led protest before. That's never been. I didn't even see that many at the big conversion therapy protests last April, and that had Jane Ozanne, Peter Tatchell, and all of the people that tend to go on ITV News and things like that. So this was astonishing to me. But yeah, at that one, I spoke to Owen Jane Hercombe to get their take on what they thought the community should do now.
Owen Hercombe, pronouns they, them.
Owen, thank you for talking to me. So, why did you come here today?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is I had a day off and I wasn't going to stay at home doing nothing when this government is attacking trans rights yet again. So I thought I'd use that day off to come to London. I found some other people here and we're just making some noise and making sure that the government and Rishi Sunak know that no matter what they do, they will always face opposition, whether that's just one of us or hundreds of us. And, you know, actually all 262,000 trans people in the UK and our allies, we will all be making noise, whether we're here today at protests where we are or just going to work. Being trans right now is constantly protesting for your rights. Everything you do is a protest for your right and dignity, and the government need to realise that, and we'll keep making sure that they realise that. and we will make sure that they don't get to do what they want, they don't get to ride Russia over our rights and dignities, and we will secure them and we will win them. Not that we should have to, they're fundamental human rights, we should just have them like cis people do. But we will make sure that we do have them and that we don't ever lose them.
How did you and your trans and non-binary friends feel when you heard what the government were intending to do yesterday?
It's just, well, I mean, I don't want to say it was inevitable, but it effectively was. There is the smallest of reforms in Scotland, and it's good. I'm not saying it's bad reforms, but it's taken 6 years for a couple more basic human rights to happen in Scotland, some basic more dignities. And of course the government, Westminster, is always going to overrule that because they don't want any improvements to trans rights, big or small. But it was also just another hammer blow because we know why they're doing it. They're doing it because they're transphobic, and it just confirms that. It's the death flails of a failing government, and it made me angry, and it made lots of us angry, and that's why some of us are here today, others will be at later protests, and we will keep fighting this government.
The people listening who may have no idea what the hell to do, do you have any recommendations or advice on what people can do about the situation?
First of all, be happy. Not about the situation, but find the people that give you joy, find the community, find your group, your chosen or birth family, find the people that can support you, because you need to look after yourselves. That's the most important thing. The next thing to do is organise. You know, this was an unorganised protest, but we just turned up and do it. You can do that where you live. Just go somewhere public and start shouting about the rights you want with a group of people for safety, obviously. Attend the organised protests, such as the one here tomorrow or the ones that I know are happening up in Scotland, and fight. But again, the advice that I'll give to everyone who wants to get involved and needs to get involved is do it with people that support you and that you support them, and make sure that nobody is left behind, no trans person is left behind, and we will win our rights.
Okay, so again, nobody's mincing their words here, are they?
I mean, I saw a lot of anger at the big protest, and I also thought of that as like a result of cumulative screw jobs at this point.
Yes.
And so they're all compounding on each other, and people are getting more and more angry. But I'm also seeing a lot of people get more and more resilient and a lot more hopeful, if that makes sense.
Yes, I agree.
It's a strange mix. When you put pressure on a community, some people rise up to be their best, and some people, not saying that they don't or go bad or anything, just, you know, it gets a bit more emotional and the pressure's on. So it's understandable. It's a very human response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wasn't just trans people who have been protesting this stuff, though. Cis allies have also been showing up, and to get an idea of why, I spoke to Rima Hazer, who attended the 17th of January London protest.
Hi, my name is Rima Hazer. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, Rima. Thanks for talking to me. So, what made you come down here today?
Well, I've been following the advancement of trans rights for a while now, and I guess since I've been with my partner who is trans now for 3.5 years, and it's really made me kind of look more carefully at these issues. And also I am in charge of the implementation of the LGBTQ+ strategy in one of the trusts in the NHS. So it's really, and we have lots of trans service users in our trust, and actually some trans staff as well. So it's really, really important for me to look at trans rights, to understand them, to come out of my house and make a stand when things aren't going the way they should. To answer the question, so that's why that's why it's important for me to be here. When I saw, in terms of like the Gender Recognition Act, we all know, for example, how difficult it is to get a certificate like that. The panel, the duration, the whole thing. Making these things easier is super, super important. But because I work with trans service users, especially super young people who are in their early teens, and also the parents of really, really young children, and amongst them, they understand fully their gender identity. So in Scotland, we had this fantastic proposal whereby young people could self-identify at 16 and be taken seriously. And it's just, I mean, Scotland is a great place to live and work in terms of, you know, how progressive they are, and that is a great model for how we should be here in England. To hear that they took some great steps, and then the UK government went there and shut it down. It was utterly shocking. We knew that there was going to be something happening, but so soon. I was just in my house shocked yesterday, so I thought, if this is going on, turn up and just, you know, kind of show people, hopefully, that people here, even though it's England, know that this is wrong. It's just wrong.
When it comes to your partner, how did they feel hearing the news yesterday?
Absolutely devastated. They picked me up from the gym, And when I left them, they were happy when I saw them after the gym, just gutted, devastated, unable to think about anything else apart from this all evening, just outraged. And for me to see my partner like that was really upsetting. And it's like, okay, I can take some time off the next day and be here and at least have some conversations, be part of this. Yeah, it was small, but it's important that we're here. When I came down the street, I thought, okay, it's small, but let me go and be counted. Yeah, it's important. I can't be a good trans ally and not be involved. And to me, it's super important. If you're in a relationship with a person from a minority group, fucking get up and come out of your house. Read the books you need to read. Go and be a part of the groups you need to be a part of. This shit counts. It's really important. So yeah, that's why I'll always be at these things. Sorry, got a bit sweary there.
It's fine. We do swearing on all of our things.
Okay.
Rima, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
So this was at the less well-attended protest, the 17th, yeah?
Yeah, trying to get vox pops and like stuff from the big one was a challenge. I did talk to some people, but the audio didn't come out well, and so they kind of had to go. Not my first choice, but it's just the nature of it was very big.
Yes.
And you could probably tell when the interview with Scottish National Party MPs, there was a lot going on. So it was a bit more difficult to cover with the equipment that we had.
Yes.
And the same goes for the Maggie Chapman interview. Like that one, the audio is not our best, you know, and there's a reason. The protest in Scotland was apparently very, very loud.
Yes, these places, well, they get noisy. There's people shouting through megaphones or PA systems. There's chants. You know, sometimes there's music happening. It's just, you know, of course it's a noisy place. It's not always the best time to try and get an interview, but in terms of having people willing to speak to you, it's actually the best time, because people that have taken the initiative to go out and do the protesting and being part of it are probably going to be a little bit more motivated to actually talk about it as well.
Yeah.
As we've observed at protests before, particularly when we were in Manchester.
So I guess the question now is, what's going to happen next?
Well, I am once again going to start a campaign here in Manchester for there to be a kind of Greater Scotland, so we can be governed from Holyrood rather than from Westminster. You know, we will defect and we'll bring Leeds with us, you know, like...
I don't really see any problem with that, mostly because I've been alive for the last 37 years, and the last 12 of those specifically have been a bit much, to be honest with you. It's been a bit much.
It's been a lot, hasn't it, as they say.
Like, the Brexit thing weren't great, and is continuing not to be great. Austerity.
Yeah, that's working out very well, isn't it? Yes, well done there.
A bit annoying. All those people dying unnecessarily during COVID, that was...
Yep,
I give that a 2 out of 10.
Yeah, that was some masterful politicking, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm just like, at this point, I think the Scottish National Party, if they ran the whole show, you know, could they be worse? Maybe. I'm willing to roll those dice.
Yeah, honestly.
They seem all right.
I mean, I have frequently, on this podcast, in fact, asked, you know, things couldn't possibly get any worse. And then subsequent events have proven that to be catastrophically wrong and unbearably optimistic to listen back to. So, yeah, we say it couldn't possibly be worse. I mean, it might be, but honestly, I will take those odds. I will roll those fucking dice. Anyway, let's go slightly more seriously to what's going to happen next. Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, of course, she has ruled out making a deal with the UK government and has signalled that her government, the Scottish Parliament, will take this to the courts.
Yeah, that's something they have done before recently over their right to hold another referendum, which the Supreme Court decided that they did not.
I see.
The UK government won that fight, so it's almost a certainty that this is going to end up in the courts. And again, that's going to take months.
Yeah,
it's going to take a while. Like, I don't see that getting any kind of decision on that for a while, which is going to be, I mean, it's going to make things for the press really cool, because they'll get to write about loads of things in the meantime. Yeah. It'll be in the narrative. They'll be able to do what they've always done.
Maybe that was the point. Maybe they don't intend to actually have to do it. They just want to delay it in Scotland for long enough, kind of as a show of force.
Yeah, there's a strong argument for them trying to, like, make trans stuff a thing in the general election, make
Yes.
bashing Scotland a thing in the next general elections to like try and excite people enough to vote for them. Be like, oh, we got to stop Scotland because they're going to trans everyone or something. Like, I mean, that, like, oh, this devolution thing's gone too far because now they're going to push gender ideology or something. I can see the Spectator doing that article.
Not
you know?
just the Spectator. I could see it in the Telegraph and the Mail, obviously with much smaller words. But
like that. I could see that being a way it plays out. But this is speculation and guesswork. We can't predict the future, and especially over something that has never happened before.
Yeah.
This Section 35 business, this block. The UK government has never blocked legislation in Scotland before.
And this is what they choose to do it on for the first time.
I mean,
there's
a kind of brilliance to it in a way. It's kind of ingenious in some ways, but also it could totally backfire. And I mean, from where I'm standing, it kind of is, because I mean, I'm seeing just like my flatmate, right? My best friends in the world. He's a great guy. He's not as informed on trans issues as I am because he's a cis guy, you know, and he's just not gonna be. And I try not to like info dump this crap on him.
Yes.
Because no one deserves that, except our audience.
Lucky you! Thanks for sticking with us, guys.
Yeah, thanks for all the support. But then we sat and we watched the debate in Parliament, the Scottish MPs referred to. And he started shouting at the TV and throwing things because he could see how absurd it all was. Because he was just like, this is about birth certificates, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, what do they have to do with getting into places? And I was like, welcome to the fight, my friend.
Welcome.
Now you get why I've been so fucking angry for years.
Welcome, comrade. Yes.
Yeah. And I can't help but think that isn't just going to be him. And yeah, you could say he has a bias. One of his best friends is a trans woman. And, you know, that may be, you know, a sign that he has been, you know, captured by the ideology or whatever.
Yes.
But, I mean, I think a lot of people are more fair-minded than people think. And when they start hearing, like, from all of this, how silly it's got, like, there's been a lot of people online asking, why is this such a big deal? I can't pay my bills.
Yep. So they've chosen to do this block during a cost of living crisis, which, you know, they have caused. So again, there's a fairly strong case to be made that this whole thing is, in whole or in part, a big ass distraction. You know, getting people angry enough out onto the streets, but not about the cost of living crisis. It's misdirecting the anger, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's all this stuff about, like, strikes, right? You know, and they pulled this now. Whilst everyone's sort of feeling sorry for the postal workers and the nurses and the railway people and everyone else who's striking.
And justifiably so, just to say, me personally, I am fully on board with those strikes. Fine, it meant that I got a few things in the post a bit later than I would have done otherwise, but I will still support the postal workers and the nurses and the teachers and everybody else who wants to strike against this ridiculous, horrible, mendacious, corrupt little government. That's exactly what should be happening, frankly. We need to make it too difficult for them to carry out their regressive agenda. That's Ashley's little soapbox moment. There's been one or two of them already.
We've got time for some more. I'm sure that there'll be more to come.
Oh, yes.
But the other side of it is there's going to be people out there, and there are definitely people out there in government, and very much in the Scottish Conservatives, that believe that this is about protecting women and girls.
Yes.
Well, cis women and girls. But it makes no sense when you consider the obvious thing of, like, oh, we need to protect women and girls from the presence of, you know, trans people and or cis people pretending to be trans, which is the thing they say.
Yeah.
By stopping a minority from changing their birth certificate easier. Which, of course, it implies the absurd scenario that birth certificates are a thing you need to scan before you access spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to make sure you've got your birth certificate in your back pocket or you won't going to be able to go to the toilet. How many of us have encountered that problem on a night out? None.
Yeah.
None of us have encountered that problem.
But it's even more absurd when you consider that 15 different women's rights groups and like equality groups, including Amnesty International, the Human Rights Consortium, Rape Crisis Scotland, Scottish Refugee Council, Scottish Women's Aid, Scottish Women's Convention, Scottish Women's Rights Centre, and others have came out against the bloc because, in their words, many of their services are already self-ID. In other words, they don't check birth certificates to use their services.
Yeah. I mean, why would you?
Yeah. Exactly. So they're just like, it's fine. Why are you doing this? And they're the people that the Conservatives and everybody else are saying they're doing it in the name of. You know, that's who they're doing it in the name of. And they're saying this is nonsense. So they really don't have a leg to stand on. Like, I can't predict how it's going to go in the courts. Like, no one can. Because courts are courts. You know, it's always a roll of the dice.
Although the thought has occurred to me that, well, I mean, we saw Mr. Trump over the pond stacking the courts with Conservative judges.
Yeah.
I wonder to what extent that may or may not have been occurring here, because then if it goes to the courts and then it goes the Sunak government's way, that's going to be a very nasty precedent set, and it could spell serious problems for the whole devolution arrangement that exists currently. And that will be fought tooth and nail, and rightly so, by the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people.
Yeah. So that was a lot, wasn't it?
It is a lot, isn't it? And just to say to yourself and to the members of our team who's gone out and spoken to people and actually got those interviews, that was some brilliant work, honestly. And we managed to speak to Mahari Black. I mean, awesome! Like, honestly, I do kind of have a little bit of a girl crush on her already, and we spoke to her and she's been on my podcast and it's so cool!
I'm sure she'll be glad to hear that. It's not out of the realms of possibility she's listening right now.
Okay, well, now I feel weird. But
yeah,
the things that she said and that everybody else in the interviews that we've got have said is right, and so eloquently expressed as well. And it's been encouraging to see this level of protest about it. But then for north of the border, it's not just an issue about trans people, it's a matter of autonomy and of government, and that is, honestly, that's far more serious, and it affects more people than just the trans community. They're just kind of using this, it's the thin end of the wedge, which, if you've ever watched Yes Minister, that's civil service speak for it's the beginning of something we don't like. So
we did a stream last week where we were talking about this stuff, and we had Beth, Pickle B, you may know her as, activist in Scotland, big in the feminism movement, big in the trans rights movement, up there doing a lot of good stuff. And she was explaining how, like, the stakes of this are really high because if they can do this with this, it kind of opens the door and sets a precedent they can do this more because the reasons are flimsy.
Indeed.
So there's a lot on the line with this one, not just the trans angle, you know? We've been wrapped into a major situation here. And I go back and forth between whether it's about us or whether it's about the whole thing. But then I guess, like Amber said in the interview, it's going to be both.
Yeah, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, so this could go so many ways that I can't even imagine. But go out there and find a protest. And, you know, if you need help finding one, follow Trans Radio UK. They're doing a lot of that stuff. Follow Trans Activism UK. They're posting about a lot of protests too. Stonewall is a riot. If you search for Stonewall is a riot on Twitter, you'll find the account. That's run by somebody I kind of know from protests, and they're putting together lists of protests and things you can do. So there are various resources out there in the community who are sharing information on the response.
Yes, indeed.
It's worth keeping things up. And I did want to add something, because we didn't really have anyone from like the trans mask perspective this time. I mean, I interviewed trans mask people. It's just the audio didn't really work out.
I see.
So the attempt was made and then it kind of went a bit weird. So I asked Alex, who is a trans guy on the team, if he had any thoughts on this. So we could get some trans masked stuff in this somewhere. And he had this to say. I have never felt so simultaneously accepted and furious as I did in Edinburgh on Thursday last week to you listeners. A crowd of about 300 or so of us, shivering our asses off outside Queen Elizabeth House on Holyrood Road, out of a feeling of solidarity and rage and upset and love for our community and our allies. Beth Pickleby was there. Her speech was great and she gave off this air of just knowing what the fuck it was she was doing. She actually introduced me to the very well-spoken and upon meeting her very understandably elected Maggie Chapman, who I had a great few minutes talking to. Additionally, Beth and I had a few words also. She seems to be of the opinion, and it's one I've seen shared, that Section 35 could well become the new Section 28. While legislatively speaking, it makes very little sense. I understand what she means.
Yes.
Anytime Scotland try to pass something pro-trans or more progressive than the Tories would like, they now have to worry about Section 35 being waved over their head like a club. The trans mask response was about 5 times bigger than I expected. Frankly, the protest in general was about 3 times bigger. But hearing trans men speak on what it's like to be us, to be ignored by the debate and otherwise treated as lost lesbian sisters, quote unquote, a common line of anti-trans rhetoric against trans-masculine people, it gave me hope more than anything else. The hope was bolstered by a young trans person I spoke to who was as angry as the rest of us and had dressed remarkably similar to myself, right down to leather jacket and punk combat boots and coloured laces.
Nice.
The punk scene is back at a time of the biggest political farce and otherization attempt against queer people in my lifetime. I don't think it's a coincidence. It was always political.
Agreed.
Think he's right.
Yeah. And as we know, trans punks smash the system. Yeah.
Oh, it's like there's a little subgenre of punk puns.
Yeah.
I can't pun. I'm not going to attempt to pun. In fact, I'll just show you how I can't pun by trying a pun.
Well, I just...
Oh no, I even failed. I failed immediately. I can't pun.
No, that's because I interrupted you. Sorry. No, you crack on.
I will try to crack a pun. No, see, I told you, I can't pun. I can't do it. That was rubbish.
Fair enough.
I'm talented in other ways.
Indeed. Demonstrably so. But I don't know, trans punk smash the system is something I've had written on my punk battle jacket for years now. So, although I guess I need a new one of those since you can't really see all of the design when I'm sat in the wheelchair. Anyway, so yeah, this is a hell of a thing, isn't it? This is a potential constitutional crisis. The people of Scotland being justifiably angry, the trans people of Scotland and indeed the rest of the UK wearily sighing and saying, yep, of course they did that because this Tory government would really just rather we didn't exist. And so this is why I think the conversion therapy ban news was completely by the bypass and was, I didn't really see that reported in very many places because the news of this and the backlash to this has been all-encompassing this week, and justifiably so, perhaps, because when a government throws the tiniest of bones out to us, as an attempt to distract from something else, it's transparent what they appear to be trying to do. But obviously we'll keep on this because we have to now, and no doubt there will be more from us on this in the coming weeks and months because this is genuinely quite big news, particularly north of the border.
Yeah, so if you're going to protest, good luck out there. Stay safe, do all the things, and yeah, we're going to be on this for the foreseeable. We're going to be hitting pods every 2 weeks going forward. Check back and check us out on the other things. Check us out on our website, whatthetrans.com. Check us out on Twitter, /whatthetrans. Check us on Facebook, /whatthetrans. Check us on Instagram, /whatthetrans. And check us out on patreon.com, /whatthetrans. If you got a few quid you want to throw our way, that would be great. It means that we can travel around to more protests and, do more episodes like this. Because this episode probably wouldn't have been possible without a bit of Patreon money. This one required a bit more shooting around and doing things. So,
yes, it sure
it's always
did.
good to get a few quid. If you don't have it, then don't. You don't need me to say that, but don't feel guilted into it. We'll be fine.
Yes. Either way around. We'll be okay. But if you're able to support what is, honestly, by this point, trans journalism, and our ability to go around and talk to people and cover these events which are now so crucial to us, even keeping the rights that we have, then yes, feel free to check out our Patreon. We will be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening. Stay angry, but stay safe. And we love you. Mwah. Ta-ta.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of What the Trans was written and produced by Ashley Talbot, Michelle Snow and Alex Maguire, and was edited by Ben Swithin and Michelle Snow.
And we would like to extend an extra special thank you to our producer-level Patreons, who are Jenny,
Break the System,
Sian Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Sophia the Sixth,
Lentil,
Philippa Taprogue,
Ramona Martinez,
Alethea Aurora,
Sadie,
Clara Vulliami,
Amelia,
Kyra the Asexual Turf Buster and our trusty sidekick Jiggly Jobs,
Candy Cox,
Zeph,
Fiona McDonald,
Torakuso H,
Murgatroyd,
Claire Renshaw,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stevie Lang,
Stella,
Cindergosa,
Rebecca Prentice,
Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion,
Georgina Young,
Ty Griffiths,
Florence Stanley,
Riley,
Helen,
Chrissy Jarvis,
a dyslexic velociraptor votes in favour of the Spookmaster General joining us all year round,
Nick Ross,
Alice Chalkley,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Lynn McKay,
Nick Duffy,
C.B. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Peter Kimball,
Wen Riverer,
Vic Parsons,
Tila Wild,
Rowan Littlejohns,
Desiree Markland,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Sarah Bedfull of Dogs,
Emma Doyle,
Catherine,
Elliot McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Ian Cumber,
Karakan 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Lyons,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean,
Lanos.
and Chris Hobley. Thanks everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.